Conscious Thought, episode 128, November 16, 2025. Universe equanimity model instead of the concept justice. Christina Herlofson, Synergetics Research Project. As a generalized, omnicomprehensive conceptioning, this word equanimity and its epistemological model, the vector equilibrium system, imaginably can be conceptualized by intellects evolving metaphysical propensity in place of the concept justice, which humans traditionally position their anticipatory outcomes between a sense of essential balance, fair play, and more seriously, innate protective instincts that perhaps are similarly settled retributively by other mammalians. Unlike the justice concepts, which punitorily accommodate any act, any audience, the vector equilibrium zero starting point for happenings and non-happenings is the empty theater and empty circus, writes R. Buckminster Fuller in Synergetics 503.03. That is ready to accommodate any act and any audience. There is nothing per se in the conceptual patterning integrity of the equanimity model suggesting an intentional, punitive, vengeful, unbalanced accommodation. The equanimity model is the vector equilibrium. In metaphysical-physical universe, the equanimity model shares the same design. It is metaphysical-physical universe's prime betweenness model. Respecting individual economic initiatives, and in point of fact, when does our intelligently evolving species, humans of a mind, become knowledgeable that the symmetries propagate the problems of consciousness? Consequently, symmetry must not be dismissed as potentially wholly WHOLLY relevant to our information gathering, cosmic to local problem, generalized conceptioning relative to critical problem solving design. In this entire regard, it is reassuring to learn that, in quotes, the vector equilibrium is the central symmetry through which both balanced and unbalanced asymmetries pulsatingly and complexedly intercompensate and synchronize, end quote, from R. Buckminster Fuller Synergetics Dictionary. When do metaphysical intellects, anticipatory design, science, complex economic initiatives integratively commence correlatively with its synergetically informed awareness of the more symmetrical, the more reproducible? As we can read in Synergetics 600.04, in quotes, regenerative means local energy pattern conservation, end quote. Is this regenerative pattern conservation generalized conceptioning relative to the intricately woven PRJ WBCHM, politics, religion, justice, war, belief complex, hierarchical matrix, inherited detriments. Those detriments perpetually overwhelm every newest born generation's trial and error explored survival stratagems and educated intention to consciously participate in forming a more perfect union. Surely, essential aspects of the law of regenerative design are incompatible in any degree of totalitarian forms of government, including its dictatorial industrialization that is subservient to the state, wherever displacement of the individual's essential omnirational informed inputs are literally and technically supplanted by expensive costs of justice-permitted lawyering that overshadows it. Yet, the concept of a justice system can be controlled by the power of any political state, whether communism, Marxism, Leninism, democratic socialism, fascism, even what we do not yet fully understand, rudimentary democratization during earliest education concerning a democratic republic systems, democratic principles that consciousness evolution has yet to theoretically associate conceptually, intelligently, referentially to omnirational universe as eternally self-regenerative generalized principles, the energy synergy ratios in the closest packing spheres, geometric topological models where spaces become spheres, and spheres become spaces, correlating to an integral nucleus, or where there is no nucleus in the operational field complex. The entire anticipatory design assembly requires structure. Structures are operational. Our 21st century subconsciously coordinated democratization can easily recall from episode 122 that operational equal physically realized, and from Synergetics 905.16, structure is spontaneous pattern stabilization of a complex of 6 individual events. And so, awareness of this tetrahedral number is relevant to biological and non-biological structuring and mechanics, and the governing system's unbiased democracy. Human imagination seems to confuse the potential of self-innate, dynamically stabilized self-interfering and the ambitious authority interfering when the governing system's top echelons, heavy-handed power players, localize their governmental intentions without a comprehensively informed clue that such behavior contributes to exploitations in the value of doing harm, inclusive of the long-ignored slave mentality which their punitory solutions refer to justice, thereby typically rationalizing governmental permission to ignore the underlying and dire culminating predicaments that are suffered upon the most vulnerable human populations. Justice's final authority is treated as an aftermath according to the principles of just behavior, and treatment thus has operated for millennia. Imaginatively and metaphorically similar to putting the cart before the horse with too little, too late, and in fact, it never was integral to law of regenerative design in the first place. As one of the PRJWBCHM contextual parameters interdependent reenacting paradigms, the J factors, reciprocal game plan is essential to the deceptive entirety wherever mass-produced artifacts for extreme monetary profits involve excusable, justifiable exploitations in the value of doing harm that requires any degree of slave mentality, accommodation, and perpetual product upgrading to keep the consumer's four-piece psyche, perspective, philosophy, and personality preoccupied, addicted behavior dependent on the technology as a communication tool, especially in the universal communication process. The iPhone is an example of smartphone production and ensuing productions of other communication technologies I am reading about in Dan Wang's book, Breakneck: China's Quest to Engineer the Future, Chapter 3. It bears little resemblance to Pearl S. Buck's The Good Earth. For thousands of years, the human condition's justice has failed to manifest equanimity, correlatively to TLBSWME. Truth, love, beauty, symmetry, wisdom, maximum economy. The always partially overlapping generations of humans everywhere on Earth desperately hope justice without bias will tolerate and accommodate humanity's complex trial and error explored survival stratagems as we evolve from absolute ignorance to omni-rational, purposeful coexistence and self-awareness of the individual's inherently inviolable integrity. Epistemology, from the dictionary definition, is the branch of philosophy dealing with knowledge, especially regarding methods, validity, and scope. Scope can be the subject matter with which every individual relevantly and comprehensively deals throughout the human condition's universal communication process. Scope does not need to be confused with weaponization and negatively reenacting expenditure solutions. Informed awareness of the equanimity model logically is compatible with individual philosophy, one of the four P's: psyche, perspective, philosophy, and personality, in process throughout a whole lifetime. Ordinarily, most of us do not associate our individual intellect's fundamental philosophy with the information and transactions in process, while naturally experientially observing the reenacting articulations occurring locally that already are possessed by the imposing authorities' permitted or impermissible, temporary and permanent guidelines according to its politics and justices' acceptable or unacceptable human behavior. Customarily, every degree and extreme of humanity's manifesting intertransactions are assigned to the Justice Department, by whichever name this authority is so called, in every culture's established laws as instituted standards, some of which elsewhere are intolerable and relatively alien, with exceptions pertaining to punishment. Punishment is a type of social control from which every reactionary angle is at the crux of the misalignment, distorting self and the other's personality's relative position concerning whom, what, when, where, and why. The reenacting articulations of the residual inaccuracies, tolerance, magnitudes in the manifest condition permit increasingly greater control to the Justice Department's exploitations, inclusive of its profit-motivated lawyers. And by whichever nomenclature the predominant PRJWBCHM, political, religion, justice, war, belief, complex, hierarchical matrix systems interaccommodating power presides. Aspects of such positional power are not lost to the observing reactionary personalities who may never consciously personally associate it with their own validation or invalidation, depending, apparently, on the depth of ingrained inculcation from earliest childhood lessons learning and what is inherently more attractive to an innate protective sense of self-control correlating to eventually discovering TLBSWME before cognizing any such acronym's context put into words by the individual's anticipatory omniscient mind-designed metaphysical generalized conceptioning fields of thought. Realizing humans are designed in principle by universe eternal omniscient mind clearly is different from any other self-realization, primarily because the very thought of it gives credence to imagination's wonderment of Yome's designing teams that may span billions of light years distances between many observing monitors for self-testing ongoing lifetimes. According to the Synergetics Dictionary, cite RBF to EJA, R. Buckminster Fuller to E.J. Applewhite, November 7, 1972, in quotes, between vector equilibrium as the prime betweenness model. Being betweenness, that's what humans always are. That's where the problems start, end quote. So, planet Earth's 21st century populations ought to pay close attention to this word between, especially since whatever it can be between and not of the myriad of special case experiences, the complex behavioral relationships is which mind capability alone discerns. Since 2 points have betweenness but no insideness, then this line of reasoning lacks the tetrahedral whole WHOLE system conceptioning, if in thought and deed, human intellection expects to manifest awareness of the always and only coexisting complementarity inside-outing and outside-inning, correlating to importing and exporting environmental transforming energy, which is never rationally accomplished by inexorable justice's positioned punitory power. However, the eternal complementation of system is zero, the inside-out phase of conceptual integrity, and so tetrahedron, the only system in universe that turns itself inside out, must be wholly WHOLLY relevant to metaphysical intellect's conceptualizations independent of size, time-space sizing, as a conscious thought language coordination function of omnirational universe correlatively with size awareness, and since it is size alone that comes to zero, not the conceptuality. Synergetics 441.05. Different from the inherited, inculcated use of the words creation and creative, informed now from the genius of R. Buckminster Fuller's synergetically explored geometry of thinking, we can accredit inventing new uses for what is discovered in principle, as, for example, the lever since humans did not create nor invent the lever, but can always invent new uses for the principle of the lever. What new uses can humans invent for the concept justice, I ask? Since its inception thousands of years ago, there seems to have been no awareness of zero disconnectedness, which involves knowledge of the vector equilibrium, the tetrahedron's empty set. Perhaps intuition was at play when deciding the number 9, as in 9 judges in the highest court of the land, if only those decisive inputs had the slightest knowledge that, in quotes, pulsation, the vector equilibrium, is the nearest thing we will ever know to eternal mind and God, the zero phase of conceptual integrity inherent in the positive and negative asymmetries which propagate the problems of consciousness, end quote. See Synergetics, VE, a zero model 440.01. Cosmologically, I have taken the liberty of more accurately renaming the sound word God that is customarily referred to in any spoken or written language everywhere on earth to Yom, universe, eternal, omniscient mind. In truth, zero phase equal inexpressible relative to awareness of the vector equilibrium as starting point, especially because humans from birth are born ignorant and depend on the manifest knowledge of the manifest populations, parents, teachers, and all forms of imaginable influence without knowledge of the words and generalized concepts that remain inexpressible, while every trial and error step depends only on the developing child's explored survival stratagems. Furthermore, in respect to the term creation, the mind is properly concerned with generalized principles, Bucky wrote on March 29, 1977. The human mind can qualify generalized principles devoid of any exception, since the generalized principle is eternal, whereas creation involves a beginning and an end, and humans deal only with apprehending special case, which is physical and terminable, whereas metaphysical mind deals in generalized conceptioning, thereby clarifying creation as an untenable concept. In an interview with Dr. Michael Brewer, Chicago, Illinois, February 16, 1978, Bucky said, in quotes, mind is very, very different from the brain, which is part of the physical, with the physical always being temporal, limited, end quote. And when asked by Dr. Michael Brewer, what is your conception of mental health? Bucky started off by saying that when he feels great, he doesn't feel anything, acknowledging a synergetic whole, WHOLE, when saying he feels great, he doesn't feel anything, acknowledging a synergetic whole, when saying, I feel great, astonished at how quickly one forgets it when pain is gone. He interpreted that to mean you feel nothing and are absolutely wide open, receptively meaning able or willing to receive something, such as a willingness to consider new suggestions and ideas. Consider derives from Latin con plus sidus, joining stars together. When informed awareness, correlatively to interfering 0 point, Synergetics 1223.15, having something to do with universal resonance, spinning, and orbiting, highly suggestive of the octave's characteristic flat resonance governing the interactions of frequencies. How close or distant is the human's reactionary impulse attracted to or distracted by octaves in music making influence that effectively accompanies emotionally charged reactions? Is it some sort of release from suppressive ignorance when never anticipating the resolution, not being informed that a star is something you cannot resolve because it is a point? Not realizing how much confusion humans are having on an extraordinary set of frequencies. See Manfred Klein's Synergetics. So, awareness of Arbuthnot-Fuller synergetics explorations in the geometry of thinking requires informed knowledge of a conceptual genesis. In quotes, a point constitutes a conceptual genesis, which may be realized in time, end quote. Synergetics Dictionary, point, February 19, 1972, rewritten April 1st, 1972. Bucky knew. Dr. Brewer understood that Bucky made a great differentiation between the brain and mind, seeing, in quotes, the brain of all creatures as always coordinating the input from universe of the physical sense, end quote. Unlike any other creatures, humans, from time to time discover relationships existing between special cases that are not, in any one special case, considered separately. Seemingly, this is another statement of synergy, and as many of us already know, synergy is the behavior of wholes, WHOLES, that cannot be predicted by the behavior of the parts. Mind alone discovers what those synergetic relationships are. Synergetics Dictionary, Volume 2, F through M. With the absence of our mind, human brain organism function only entropically, which is not the least bit troubling to acknowledge, of human mind operating terrestrially as a local cosmic monitor. The syntropic effectiveness compares to that of any other species' biological functioning, particularly comparing the speed of light to the speed of sound, which is 1,000,000-fold more effective, Bucky writes. The heart of all the always and only abstract scientific generalizations is the vector equilibrium, which is our 21st century synergetically informed awareness of the equanimity model. The equanimity model is at the heart of all interrelationships existing between and not in, nor of any of the empirically apprehended intertransforms of the every when and everywhere intertransforming scenario universe. When using the word empirical, the apprehended information is based on observations or experience and not theory or pure logic, suggesting metaphysical generalized conception in fields of thought require a rudimentary hands-on experience of the vector equilibrium's jitterbug, also referred to as the vector flexor model. As we can read in Synergetics 464.07, in quotes, the vector equilibrium's jitterbugging conceptually manifests that any action, and its inherent reaction force applied to any system always articulates a complex of vector equilibrias, macro-micro jitterbugging involving all the vector equilibrias, ever cosmically replete, complementation by the always co-occurring internal and external octahedra, end quote. Both radiationally and gravitationally. The articulations of the vector equilibrium jitterbug can also be stated as the propagative transformations of it, compared to the enormously complicated millenniums-old justice models that rarely delve deeply into the heart of dubiously decisive, unbalanced, destabilizing, punitive, and punishing multi-personality disorder, invokes mixed messaging while propagating mindless emulations of its worst-case scenarios. The prime betweenness vector equilibrium equanimity model is an omni-considerate, omni-rational gift that keeps on giving from Yom stars. Consciously informed awareness of the equanimity model is right on time, considering the relative insanities and states of competition between radical institutions from various nations now invading our shores and the land we live on, while still in the experimental process of forming a more perfect union that was initiated before we ever heard of the equanimity model as a viable replacement for the context justice. Until next time, thank you from Christina Herlofson.